we've got 3 speakers, so we were working through microphones and clickers. So we have a slightly different format than prior lectures. But first, welcome to the continuation of the 2018 Wilderness Lecture Series. Our theme this year is The Rivers Will Run, a celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Tonight we have a slightly different format because we're going to have 3 speakers, and usually we just have 1. But what's really cool about tonight is it's our one lecture that's going to primarily, well, it's 100% focus on management. And so we've learned a lot in the last several weeks about what the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act actually is, in a political sense, what it is in an emotional sense for people that care about rivers, what it is in an advocacy sense in terms of organizations that are working towards the protection of rivers that are currently designated under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, as well as those that people want to see protected into the future. And so today we're actually going to hear from folks who are managers at the national level for rivers that are designated wild and scenic. And so this is a really awesome opportunity to be able to interact with folks that are actually doing the on-the-ground work in terms of managing wild and scenic rivers. So I'm going to introduce all 3 of our speakers and a little bit about what they're going to be talking about. So first, we're going to have 2 folks from the U.S. Forest Service in the northern region. Jimmy Gaudry, who's the Wilderness, Wild and Scenic Rivers and Guides Program Manager for the Forest Service for Region 1, the northern region. Jimmy won the 2017 Bob Marshall Award for Individual Champion of Wilderness Stewardship. He's provided leadership not only here in the northern region, but prior to the northern region was in the southeast region. And there he was regional program manager, and he worked a lot in partnership development. So he helped to grow and sustain the Southern Appalachian Wilderness Stewards Program, or SAWS, for folks that are in the southeast. It's one of the leading wilderness organizations there, as well as across the nation, working with the Forest Service on various partnership programs. One of those programs is the Wilderness Skills Institute that Jimmy helped start in the southeast region and is now helping to start here in the northern region, in Region 1 of the Forest Service. Since 2012, Jimmy has served as a Forest Service liaison to the National Wilderness Stewardship Alliance, and his work has led to over 500 wilderness stewards having access to training, over 100 new professional wilderness stewards created through partnership development, and a more connected national community of wilderness professionals. I will say that Jimmy and Coulter, who I will introduce next, will also both be talking more about their own professional development paths when they start speaking. Coulter Pence is with us tonight, also from the northern region. She's the Wilderness, Wild and Scenic Rivers and Trails Program Manager for the Forest Service on the Flathead National Forest and the Hungry Horse Glacier View Ranger District. She received the 2017 National Forest Wilderness Award for Outstanding Wild and Scenic River Manager. She has served a critical role in developing and maintaining a management relationship with Glacier National Park. And through her efforts and commitment, the National Forest at the Flathead National Forest level and Glacier National Park have furthered their efforts in coordinating and sharing in a River Ranger Volunteer Patrol program. She's also helped improve training and coordination of agency river patrols and monitoring. She was significant in helping pull together a regional wild and scenic river management workshop in the northern region in March of 2017. And Coulter came incredibly highly recommended by many people to include in this, this lecture series. So I'm excited to have both Jimmy, who I've worked with significantly through the Wilderness Institute, and Coulter here this evening. After Coulter and Jimmy give their presentation discussing management of wild and scenic rivers, we're going to hear from John Gangemi, who is with the River Management Society. He's the training coordinator for the River Management Society. And he has been coordinating what's called the River Studies and Leadership Certificate Program, which might be of interest to some of you because it's a certificate program that's been developed by the River Management Society that's being implemented in universities across the country. And we're in early stage conversations about hopefully being able to set up this program here at the University of Montana. John is a graduate of the University of Montana. His expertise includes fisheries, river ecology, water quality, regulatory processes and permitting, stakeholder engagement facilitation, and river recreation and management planning. He was most recently the director of hydropower licensing for a private environmental consulting firm. Early in his career, John worked for the U.S. Forest Service, the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and also conducted river ecological research. He also spent many years at the Flathead Lake Biological Station. Among his accomplishments at American Whitewater, where he worked as the National Conservation Director, John authored their River Stewardship Toolkit to help volunteers participate in the management of their local rivers. And so John is going to speak after Jimmy and Coulter speak about management from the perspective of how we train the next generation of river stewards in this country. So with that, I will hand it over to our guest speakers. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Natalie. And so just checking it. Oops.
Yeah.
Green light's on. Can you hear me? Yeah. Hey, thanks, Natalie. Way more information than we gave you. I think we said keep it simple. But I appreciate the kudos. And just want to thank the university for hosting us here tonight, as well as the Wilderness Institute, and truly appreciate the fact that the Wilderness Speaker Series this year has been focused on the 50th anniversary of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. We don't have quite the portal for information for Wild and Scenic Rivers as we do for wilderness, and so this is a great venue for that. Coulter and I, as Natalie said, we're going to spend the first few slides just kind of sharing a little bit about ourselves so that you have a perspective of who we are and where we're coming from as we present to you tonight.
I have my notes here on the podium, so I'm going to be looking at my notes periodically. Jimmy and I are both going to tell you a little bit about our backgrounds. The goal here is so that you can see the career path for two examples with the Forest Service. And I must admit, I had some fun putting together this slide because I got to look back and find some fun photos of the things I've gotten to do so far in my career. I hail originally from central and western Nevada. There's not a lot of waterways there. It's dry country, and also southern Idaho as well. But I grew up in a family that valued public lands, outdoor recreation, service, and science particularly. So as a young woman, as a young girl, I did every sort of summer camp in the science world, scouting activity, volunteer days that I could hear of. And of course, my parents really encouraged me. Maybe not every day I loved it, but over time I started to see myself fitting in this world. I went to college at the University of Idaho. I did study natural resources there. I got my bachelor's degree, and I stayed there and got my master's of natural resources. I wanted to be a landscape ecologist when I was in school. I did not necessarily see myself in recreation or wilderness or wild and scenic rivers, but I realize now it was the right place. I should have been here this whole time. And I would say because I was interested in landscape ecology, because I was interested in big picture systems, managing whole areas, all those dynamics. And now that I get to manage a wilderness area or a wild and scenic river, I get to do those things. So I may not be a landscape ecologist, but I'm managing big picture stuff and all of the integrated resources within that. During the summer times, I worked for the Forest Service and temporary work, wilderness ranger, fire, helitack, developed recreation. I tried to sample a range of things and also work in some interesting places. I was brought on through the Forest Service through what's now called the Pathways Program. That's not a rehabilitation or rehab program. That's a hiring authority, and if you're not already familiar with it as a student, and if you wish to work for the Forest Service or one of the other federal land management agencies, you should look into the Pathways Program, because that's how we recruit a lot of people straight out of college. And I was converted for permanent employment right after graduation. I worked for the Payette National Forest at that point, worked there for 6 years, and I transferred to the Flathead National Forest, and I've been there for about 12 years. Specific to rivers, I grew up rafting recreationally. My family did that on the East Fork of the Carson River, for example, and a little bit on the Salmon River. So those are big waterways. When I moved to the Flathead, if you have been there, the water's not as big, and I did not think it was possible to raft on the Flathead when I first saw it, and now I love doing that. I like to see how low the water can get and how we can still go down the river. The reason why I transferred is that I wanted to specialize in wilderness work, and the Wild and Scenic River stuff came along. I did not know it was the multifaceted world that we're going to share with you and that you've been learning about. So I'm so pleased that I got to introduce myself into this world, and I didn't even really know what I was getting into originally. In my current job, I'm the Wilderness, Wild and Scenic Rivers Trails Program Manager. So specifically, I manage the northern part of the Great Bear Wilderness, which is a part of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. And I'm the river manager for the North Fork and Middle Forks of the Flathead. I coordinate a spectrum of trail resources. I work with the Jewel Basin program area. We have a person in the audience who's familiar with Jewel Basin. And we have a cave program as well locally. So essentially, I manage a backcountry program. Specific to rivers, just to tell you a little bit about my duties, I'm managing the North Fork and the Middle Fork. I coordinate the administrative responsibilities on those rivers for the Forest Service. I coordinate with Glacier National Park for operations where we share a common boundary. I hire and supervise the river rangers who work with us in the summer. I administer the outfitter and guide permits that are present on the river system. I support our planning work, so if we have a whole range of things, but a classic vegetation management proposal, a timber sale. Look to see that the Wild and Scenic River values are respected and thought of in that planning process. I ensure that we implement specific direction in our river management plan. We have specifics, things that need to be done. That's my job to see that through. And one thing, and I know Jimmy knows about this because he sees the reports, we do annual reporting to Congress, and it's sort of clinical entering data, but we do annual reporting upward to Congress, and that's my job. And then lastly, I advise leadership on Wild and Scenic River issues. So our local leadership, the forest supervisor, the district rangers, it's my job to say, hey, you should think about this. This is coming around the corner. This is what this means for Wild and Scenic Rivers. So anyways, that was a description of what my background is and what my work is.
So we're using the clicker.
Yeah.
And there is a pointer.
Yeah.
But, yeah, all right. Hey, my background is a little bit different than Coulter's. I think it would be fair to say that I grew up a city boy. Top left-hand corner, I grew up in New Orleans along one of the most managed rivers probably in the U.S., but managed for a different set of values than we manage Wild and Scenic Rivers. I remember spending time on the river as a kid. I remember field trips going up and down the river and going through the lock systems that they use for shipping vessels, and we very much valued the river we had there. And so with that, though, I had lots of outdoor experiences growing up. My undergraduate degree is from the University of New Orleans, and at one point I wanted to really help people, so I focused on sociology and psychology, which has played really well with my career, because to be honest, a lot of what we do is recreation and people management, and I lean on that quite a bit. So never stop with what you have, you can keep moving on, are my words of wisdom. I met a couple in New Orleans when I was in college, and he was a writer for the local newspaper. He's the outdoors writer, and his name was Bob Marshall, believe it or not. And that couple inspired me to spend some time out west and explore public lands, and even lent me equipment to do so. I'm friends with those folks to this day, and they come and visit us here in Missoula from time to time. So from there, I decided I wanted to work in public lands, and in 1993, I moved to Wyoming with a friend of mine from college, and I volunteered for the Forest Service as a wilderness ranger. And this is, I wanted to highlight this bottom picture here. That's the Upper Green River that I'm pretty sure Scott Bossy spoke with you all about last week. And so my career started in the Bridger Wilderness and the Upper Green River. And places like that have special meaning to folks of us who've worked there before. And so it's exciting to see some of the discussions that are going on there. My realization as I looked at photos is we didn't have GoPro or iPhones when I was a seasonal, and most of my pictures these days involve my kids. And so it was fun to do this exercise as well. So I spent about 10 years working as a seasonal, and these photos, the right photo with the crew, that was a Wilderness Ranger crew back in the day on the White River that I led. Soon thereafter, I decided, or after around 10 years or so, I got a permanent job. Did that for about 5 years in Colorado and decided I wanted to move back to the Southeast. And so I applied for Forest Service jobs there. Wound up working on a forest as the Wilderness and Trails Program Manager. During that time, I actually spent some time in our Washington, D.C. office working in wilderness and wild scenic rivers, and then moved into the regional office in Atlanta, Georgia, the furthest place from where I thought I'd land in my career, and smack dab in the center of the city, but having the honor to manage public lands across 13 states and Puerto Rico, which included 17 wild and scenic rivers across the region. And so after doing that for a while, 2.5 years ago, this job came open here in Missoula, a dream job for someone who's doing what I'm doing, and I applied for it and got it. And so here I am, living the dream, and hopefully going to share it with you guys tonight. Day to day, though, my dream involves sitting in a cubicle most of the time, working through policy and planning, supporting folks like Coulter in the field, very much like her, supporting decision makers and providing them with information and feedback regarding decisions to be made regarding wilderness and wild and scenic rivers. And clicker. So I think most of you are familiar with the Forest Service at this point in the session, but I did want to just kick us off with a brief overview of who we are, because that's the agency we represent as we stand here before you. So the Forest Service is made up of 9 regions. Each region is led by a regional forester, and so this map shows those 9 regions. We have 155 national forests across the country, as well as 20 national grasslands, and we manage 193 million acres total. Obviously, the northern region up here is our landscape that we work in. And I'm gonna keep looking for a different clicker. So Forest Service organization, I think most people are familiar with National Forest System lands, where Coulter and I work day to day. But beyond that, the Forest Service also has an international programs branch where we do things in many other countries. We have a state and private forestry branch where we work with the states and private citizens to manage forests. And then we also have a research branch, which is the largest research agency in the world for forestry. So why was the Forest Service established? Well, we work with an agency that has a rich and diverse history, and certainly much of that's rooted here in Montana and Idaho and Region 1. I think many of us know about that history, but we began with a focus on water and timber, and I think that's important, that water was always a part of why the Forest Service existed. Later on down the road, we expanded to include water, forage, wildlife, wood, and recreation. The Forest Service gets 148 million recreation visits a year based on our 2006 National Visitor Use Monitoring data. We have around 30,000 employees, and we use over 100,000 volunteers to get our work done year to year. So we're going to get folks going a little bit here. I'd ask you to open up the Wild and Scenic River map that we handed out to you earlier and just take a look at it. This is a chance for you to explore what's on the system. Mike, I know that you know the system. But does anybody need a map actually that doesn't have one? Because we have a few more up here. So as you look at it, I'd ask you to just take a look and identify the river closest to where you grow up. And I think you might be surprised that there is a river or there isn't a river, or maybe you think there should be a river there. It's an interesting exercise. But while you do that, I want to just share a few things about the national system that I think you should know. Let me get a sip of water here. So very much like the Wilderness Act, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act presents us with one law that guides the management of these rivers across all 4 land management agencies. There are some state rivers designated. Looking on rivers.gov, which we'll share with you later, I found that 18 states had designated wild and scenic rivers. Since December 2014, which was the last designation, we have 12,734 miles total and 208 rivers designated across 40 states and Puerto Rico. I think you've heard this statistic before, but I'm going to repeat it. This is a little more than 1/4% of the nation's rivers. So 1/4%. So aside from the land management agencies, we obviously have a primary role in managing these areas. Other agencies also have a role, and a few of those are the Bureau of Reclamation, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Farm Service Agency, and the Army Corps of Engineers, among others. Coulter and I were in a discussion today where we listed off a few more agencies that we believe have management responsibilities that we might not have recognized in the past. So Wild and Scenic Rivers in the northern region, we manage all or part of 5 rivers with a total of 446 miles. And as I pulled this presentation together, I realized that in the river community, these statistics vary depending on who you talk to, and it gets to be a bit frustrating, but that's the numbers I'm sticking with today. Those rivers, and you can see them here on the map, include the St. Joe, the Rapid, the Middle Fork of the Clearwater, which includes the Lochsa and the Selway, and I'll speak to that in a minute as well, the Salmon River, and the Flathead River, which includes the 3 forks of the Flathead, and we'll hit on that story as well. Also, though, keep in mind, 446 miles. We also manage 65 eligible rivers and 9 suitable rivers, and we call those study rivers. And the mileage on that adds up to be a little bit over 1,500 miles. So we have 450 miles of designated rivers, but we manage over 1,500 miles of rivers that are study rivers. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but essentially those study rivers are rivers that we have found to be eligible or suitable for Wild and Scenic River designation and made that recommendation, and we manage those to protect the values that afforded them that eligibility or suitability. Those include, and you're going to hear this a few times tonight, but free flow, the free-flowing aspect of the water, water quality, and the outstandingly remarkable values. So for those who would rather see pictures than maps, we put this up here too. Pretty way to talk about our rivers, but also wanted to make a point here, and it's back to that Lochsa, Selway, Middle Fork. I was here a few weeks ago when Tim Palmer presented, and he discussed this. He said, well, I know that rivers are designated and that the agencies consider the Middle Fork to be the Lochsa, Selway, and Middle Fork, but I split them out when I talk about them. So he considers those 3 rivers. The agency lumps them, and we consider them one. And so just trying to keep folks on their toes. But anyway, when we speak of rivers, that's the way that all 4 agencies have decided to speak to them. And so if you see differences, that's kind of where that comes from. Alrighty then. So here's another thing. This has been a great exercise trying to put this presentation together, and I'll look at John as I talk to this because I know that you're working on training and other resources. But my experience, I've had the opportunity to do plenty of wilderness presentations, but not so many wild and scenic river ones. And for a wilderness one, I'm not going to lie, sometimes I go straight to wilderness.net, which I think most folks in here are probably familiar with. And there's a plethora of presentations for me to pull from and share. When we started talking about doing this, I realized there's not that resource out there right now. And so this is us making this up from scratch. And so this is a river. I said all that just to get to, this is supposed to look like a river. And so the idea is we're going to walk you down a timeline, but try and share an agency perspective as we go down that timeline. And we started this with what I would call a research question. Is the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was signed in 1968, and neither of us were around in 1968. And so to speak to what the agency was thinking, I opened up a few of Tim Palmer's books to see what he had to say, and he did have some things to say. We started making some calls. We talked to folks, who do you know that's around? And right now we have some leads, so I think this story will continue. But in the very unscientific, informal discussions we had, I think we came up with a few themes. One was that in '68, the agency reaction was one of excitement. I think a lot of folks who were around viewed this as a new and interesting time, and that having these designations presented opportunities for career development or new skill sets to be developed, and an opportunity for them to do something new. I did look in Tim Palmer's books, and he spoke about a few things here. And I want to get a couple of his quotes right. So first and foremost is that, so some believe that the designation of a river, and I think we would think about this as well today, is just step one in the protection of the river. If we're not managing it according to the law, then it's not being protected. And so in Tim Palmer's 1993 book, he had a quote that hit on that. He also talked about the fact that river managers were concerned about the complexities of managing these rivers because they cross multiple ownership patterns, and you need to work with many different jurisdictions. And so for an agency person thinking about that workload, I think it was something new and different. He also noted that there was significant input from federal agencies that went into developing a potential river system. So certainly we were at the table developing or giving input into what this system might look like. We talk about the fact that we know that conservationists and politicians had a role in this, but that agency staff were there as well, making recommendations for plans and the protection for rivers. So it's a mixed bag right now. I think even today, as we see designations, it's a mixed bag, but certainly I think we had folks who were very engaged. We have others who recognized that there were management challenges ahead. Others who were looking for the resources they needed, and others who were at the table helping to make the decisions in order to move rivers forward with protections. So 1986, moving on down the river here. So for agency staff in 1986, here's a big deal for us that others might not think about, and it's that the Wild and Scenic River Act was amended and it required agencies to then develop comprehensive river management plans for each river. And so rivers that were to be designated after that 86 amendment to the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act were given 3 years to develop a comprehensive river management plan. But rivers that were designated prior to that were given 10 years to go ahead and do that. And so, yeah, anyway, for us, that was a turning point and certainly added a different aspect to river management for us. So 1993, and this is where I'm going to bring it up to and then pass it over to Coulter. 1993, once again, this is when I started with the Forest Service. So it was the 25th anniversary of the Wild and Scenic River Act. I was in the field. I don't remember anything like this going on. But one thing did happen that year, and it was the formation of the Interagency Wild and Scenic River Coordinating Council. And so that council was the result of conservation organizations coming to the agencies and saying, boy, we'd really like to see you guys come together and create a consistent way to manage rivers and improve river management. And so with that, within 2 years, the agencies had developed a charter and had that charter signed off by agency leads. And to this day, that group still meets. We will share and I'll say it again, the website rivers.gov, that's open to anyone here to use. There are a plethora of white papers posted there. That's our go-to. That's the closest thing we have to wilderness.net right now. And I would say, a weekly basis, I go there and look at a paper to see, how do I do this, or how do I do that, or how have we decided to do this in the past? And so anyway, 1993, and from there, I'm going to pass it back to Coulter.
I got to forward through my notes here for a minute. Okay, 1998, this is around the time I started working for the Forest Service. That is the 30th anniversary of the Wild and Scenic River Act. So there were some bigger moments like on these anniversaries, sort of maybe smaller scale, but similar to what we're seeing today. At that time, there was a forum held in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. Some names that we recognize still today that are with us: Liz Close, Chris Brown, Jackie Dietrich, Tim Palmer, Bill Wolf. They're still with us and advocating and working on wild and scenic rivers. Accomplishments by the agencies, staffing the Interagency Wild and Scenic River Council, completing river studies, and making additional recommendations. By the, I'm sorry, all of a sudden I have space. What is NGO? Non-government organization. I just spaced that, sorry. At that time, the NGO world is starting to expand for local advocacy of rivers and designations and education efforts. I wanted to share at this point in time, as I was just starting as a temporary employee, but the person who had my job in 1998, there was one manager for all three forks of the Flathead, and that was that person's primary job. I now manage 2 of the 3 forks, and that's maybe 1/3 to 1/4 of my job. So in the span of from 1998 to now, there's been a lot of consolidation. But at the same time, the internet has been invented since then. There's a whole lot of things that make my type of work, Jimmy's type of work, more efficient as well. So just trying to share some of the changes that have happened across time. Maybe I didn't go forward enough there. Oh, one last one here. 2008, that's not noted on the slide here, but that was the 40th anniversary, and I was on the Flathead River system at that time. And we used the 40th to celebrate. We used that to highlight at our booths. We had parade floats, but there wasn't a lot of stuff going on at that time. I will say I remember there was a lot of wonder. Well, the 50th will be coming. That's just around the corner. What's going to happen when the 50th comes? So it's nice to see all that come together. At the same time, 2008 was a very busy time for wilderness managers. We were really in the depths of the Chief's 10-year stewardship challenge, for those who are familiar with it. There was a lot of focus on wilderness stuff at that point in time. So we've arrived to 2008 at the end of, well, maybe not the end of the river, but we can't see around the next corner of the proverbial river. And we have the 50th anniversary, expanding partnerships, a lot of emphasis, and I think we're going to talk more about this, on ensuring all rivers have comprehensive river management plans, working on land acquisition, developing training with the River Management Society, and trying to cultivate highly motivated and professional river managers in this field. So let's talk a little bit here about the agency roles and responsibilities for Wild and Scenic River. And I think this is a nice photo collage here. That is myself and 2 river rangers standing on the shores In the upper Middle Fork, that's just above Cabin Creek, and we've got a log jam. How are we going to navigate around the log jam? That's a proverbial scene there. And then overlaying that is the cover page of the Wild and Scenic River Act. We were able to get around that log jam. We lined the rafts through some very narrow waters on River Right there, and we were able to stay safe. It took a long time, tested our skills, but it was a good day. So, with specific to the Wild and Scenic River Act and specific to this slide, we want for you to take away here that every time Jimmy and I are doing our work, we do have to reflect back and say, what does the law say? There's many ideas and high-minded sort of notions, but our jobs are driven by what the Wild and Scenic River language says. It's our job to interpret it and to implement it. So we'll go through some of the basics here. The law is 13 pages long. Originally, it designated 8 rivers. And some of the key language in there, and you may have had this read before, but for me it's really important to share it. Key passages: Congress declares that the national policy of dam building and other construction at appropriate sections of the rivers of the United States needs to be complemented by a policy that would preserve other selected rivers in their free-flowing condition to protect water quality of such rivers and to fulfill other vital national conservation purposes. So that's section 1B. On the slide here, you'll see that it asks us to protect and enhance rivers and do all of these things: protect and enhance the free-flowing condition, the water quality, protect and enhance the outstandingly remarkable values. Some of those 8 rivers, and you guys may have already had this covered, but the Middle Fork of the Clearwater, 11 Point, Middle Fork of the Feather, Rio Grande, Rogue, St. Croix, Middle Fork of the Salmon, and Wolf. Oh, I wanted to share with you, well, those are just an example of a dam. That's the Hungry Horse Dam. And the upper Middle Fork of the Flathead, that's the Spruce Park area where there was a proposed dam. And concern over damming that river at that location is one of the inspiration for the people who helped develop the idea of the Wild and Scenic River Act, the Craighead brothers. So 8 key points in the law that we're going to cover here is classification, how to classify a river, what to protect, those qualities on the bullets listed below. We must establish boundaries, write a comprehensive river management plan. River managers must review federally assisted water resources projects. That's commonly called Section 7. We'll talk more about that. And we're to ensure federal management consistency. There's a study process for these eligible and suitable rivers, and then there's some guidance for acquisitions of lands in the river corridor. Let's see here. I think we'll keep going. Have you guys already had a primer on classification of rivers for those who've been here? Yes? Okay, I see some thumbs up. I'll just do a quick discussion here. On this map, this is the Three Forks of the Flathead. You can see all 3 classifications of rivers. So wild in the upper Middle Fork and upper South Fork. These are mostly in wilderness, but not exclusively in wilderness. There's a section of the South Fork that's wild in green here. That's outside of wilderness. It's not accessible by road. In fact, it's almost impassable. There's a gorge there. Very few people are able to float through that. You can't drive to it. There's no trail there. So it meets that definition of wild. Scenic in the upper North Fork. Of course, it's very beautiful up there, but it's classified as scenic because it meets that definition of largely primitive and undeveloped shorelines, accessible only in places by roads. And then we have recreational stretches of the lower Middle Fork and lower North Fork. And in those cases, a fair amount of shoreline development, roads lining the river. In one place on the Middle Fork, or on the lower Middle Fork, we have a railroad along that zone there. And key point here that many people need to remember routinely, because people always assume this: one classification of river is not better than the other. It's just representing a spectrum. One is not more valuable than the other. The Forest Service, or in this case, the Forest Service's responsibility is to maintain those qualities that made them those classifications. So maintain that wild character, maintain that scenic character. And it's something that's not going to change. We have to work to strive to keep all of our management actions in alignment with those classifications. we're going to talk about outstandingly remarkable values. Have you guys had a primer on outstandingly remarkable values? See a few nods? Okay, well, here's some examples. I'm going to give you some Flathead-specific examples. For outstandingly remarkable values, though, I want you to know that we are interpreting and trying to identify unique, rare, or exemplary examples of what makes this river so special. So here's an example for the Flathead. Geologic. Let's talk about the geologic value. We've identified geology, the geologic value is outstandingly remarkable. There can be system-wide ones, and these rocks, these beautiful colored rocks right here, this is a system-wide geologic value for the Three Forks of the Flathead. The bluish, red, gray, green, those are Proterozoic belt rocks that are exposed in our river system, and if you see them in person, they're a rainbow just like you see there, and they're accentuated by the turquoise-hued glacial till waters. You can't see that hardly anywhere else in this country. It's really remarkable. That's a system-wide ORV. We also have site-specific stuff. This is a fossilized wasp, and we have a fossil site in the lower Middle Fork, and it is being explored by the Smithsonian Institute under permit, and they are uncovering plants and insects not known to exist before, or also finding examples of fossils of plants and insects that they didn't know existed in this part of the world. They have a way of classifying the quality and quantity of fossils found at a particular site, and if it continues on this track, it will be one of the most rich fossil sites in the world, if it continues along this way. We have an excellent a geologic site-specific value in the Three Forks of the Flathead, and those wasps, or the mosquitoes, they're able to extract, they're of such high quality, they're able to extract hemoglobin from them. So this is almost Jurassic Park type of stuff. So our mission with the Forest Service administering the Wild and Scenic River Act is to ensure that we're protecting and enhancing this geologic value right here. And just to show you, here's all of the outstandingly remarkable values for the Three Forks of the Flathead. I'm not going to run through the details of all of them, but want for you to see that we've considered the matter, made professional judgments, took into account inventories, scientific studies, and compared that to other nationally and regionally comparisons, and this is what we came up with. This is our job, is to protect all of these values. Okay, boundaries. Let's see here. When a wild and scenic river is designated, the interim boundary, unless it's modified later on, is to be a 1/4 mile on each side of the river. So that's sort of that corridor, that zone in which we're to allow and prioritize the wild and scenic river values. This is where the protection is strongest for wild and scenic rivers. ORVs are typically based within that corridor. They're not marked on the ground necessarily, although you will see them on maps typically, but not necessarily on the ground. Even though you have a river corridor, actions outside of that boundary, we will still see, is something outside of that boundary going to impact the outstandingly remarkable value? Well, in that case, we would consider the matter and look into that. Boundaries are not always sinuous with the river, meaning to say they don't follow the boundary or the river corridor or the river route exactly. In some cases, they're snapped to the public land survey system, so you'll see them squared off a little bit. So don't be surprised if you see a little bit of straight lines around a river. Private property may lie within the boundaries, and commonly does, but federal law does not automatically apply to those private lands. It does, however, set up a framework for agencies like the Forest Service to seek out partnership with those private landowners, whether it's working with them to secure a conservation easement, or if it's a really important parcel that we wish to acquire, consider acquiring that title in that land. But this is a place where we would say, well, if you're in the river corridor, we want to emphasize working with you to protect the river. Okay, comprehensive river management plan. This is a, oh, I need to change the slide. This is a busy slide here. There's a number of components that are meant to be in comprehensive river management plans. We just described ORVs, so we need to establish those ORVs in a comprehensive river management plan. The second point there, Comprehensive River Management Plan is to address the development of land and facilities, typically within that river corridor, that quarter mile of each side. For example, it's going to say we want to have an access site here, we want to limit development in this location. It's okay to have roads here, it's not okay to have roads in this location. So the development of land and facilities is supposed to be spoken to in a comprehensive river management plan. It's meant to address user capacities, which can be a really complicated subject, and I wasn't going to dive into it unless you were going to be prepared to answer that. Okay. Yeah, I think it will come up, but I would just summarize to say user capacities generally are meant to say, here's how much use the river and those outstandingly remarkable values can tolerate, and then the agencies are meant to manage for that. Another element there in a comprehensive river management plan is in-stream flows. We need to establish the water quality and the water quantity necessary to protect and enhance those ORVs. So how much water and how good of quality of water that is. Let's see here. The last components here, identify the regulatory of other agencies. So do any of the state agencies have a role to play? Who are the partners and the other cooperating agencies? And include a monitoring strategy. I think we have a transition here.
So I'm going to hit on the last three aspects of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act that we spend quite a bit of time on. And so next up is just our review of federally assisted resource projects. And Coulter spoke to this earlier. In our cool river management lingo, we call this a Section 7. And so Section 7 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act focuses on restrictions on hydro and water resource development projects on designated rivers. And so the intent here is that any federally assisted project that's going to happen on a wild and scenic river is going to be reviewed by the agency to make sure that we protect the three things we've discussed already: free flow, outstanding or remarkable values, and water quality. When we take a course on this, they make us chant those three things before the course is done. So free flow, ORV, and water quality. What triggers this? Usually what triggers this is work that's going to occur in the bed and banks of a designated river. And the second thing is federal assistance. And so federal assistance can be anything from funding to a permit being required. We typically review, document, and comment on it if it's a project that's being done by another entity. I have a few examples here and these are from the Southeast, but standard ones that we work on routinely are things like culvert replacements or bridge work, or stream bank stabilization might be one, and these are two examples. There's a culvert and a stream bank stabilization project. We have entire classes that we work with the River Management Society on to learn what triggers this, how you handle it, what's the best way to document it. So the agencies are also required to go through a Wild and Scenic River study process. I think I hit on this earlier a little bit, but initially we were required to study the 27 rivers that were designated as study rivers in the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And an example of that was the Three Forks of the Flathead. We were directed to do that as expeditiously as possible. And so the Flathead study took about 8 years. And I learned this today, right before we finalized the study, Congress designated the river as a Wild and Scenic River. And so although they were waiting for the study process, they went ahead and designated it before the study was done. But more importantly today is Section 5D1 in the Act. And it's important because it directs the agencies to do studies each time we do a river management plan, a forest plan for the Forest Service. And so, remember I brought this up before, like a broken record, but 446 miles of designated river in the region, but we have over 1,500 miles of study rivers. And many of these have or will be run through a forest planning process, and will either have more or less when that process is done. And so an important figure there. The photo on the right is my son hanging out on the Yak on the Kootenai National Forest, which is a study river. So a few other study rivers locally, though, just to mention. Mike would kill me if I didn't mention Rock Creek, right up I-90 is also a study river. And then many of you may not realize that portions of Rattlesnake are also a study river. And so once again, those are rivers that we are required to also protect the values so that they can continue to be considered for wild and scenic river designation. So the Wild and Scenic River Act also addresses acquisitions and land titles. I shared this slide with the staff of the Forest Service, and the lands people were in the room, and we could do a whole session today on land acquisition is what I heard. But a few key things that it gives us direction on. So we're allowed to look at land purchases along the corridor. These may or may not make sense to you, but no fee title after an average of 100 acres per mile of federal ownership. There's no condemnation of the title after 50% of the public ownership, 50% of public ownership. State and tribal lands have limitations. There are no changes in incorporated cities with approved zoning, so we can't go in and purchase something and change the zoning on it if a city already has zoning. Trades and donations are okay, and all this needs to tie back to that comprehensive river management plan and the direction we're going with that. And so essentially, if we're looking at those acquisitions, we should be able to go to that river management plan and say, this is why we're doing this, because it's going to help us manage this corridor based on the plan. Additionally, though, we use conservation easements quite a bit, and in this region in particular, we have over 200 conservation easements on wild scenic river corridors. Typically, those are set up to protect one or more of the outstandingly remarkable values. The lands folks in our office made sure that I knew that that was a forever relationship we were in. Once we get into a conservation easement, sounds like it's stronger than a marriage. We were in that forever. So on the Flathead, for example, they have 62 easements with 5,200 acres set aside in conservation. So moving on, how are we doing? This is a photo of Adam Washbeck, who's a wilderness and wild scenic river ranger on the Bitterroot. And in my mind, he's keeping things afloat. He's got the tools he needs to stay above water. Day to day, wild and scenic river management is very much an interdisciplinary endeavor. There's not a project or work within a river corridor where we're not working with a biologist or an archaeologist or a hydrologist or engineers. The list can go on just depending on what the current issue of the day is. Many of us who are in this field honestly come from a recreation management background. I know sometimes it can leave me feeling like I know a little bit about a lot of things, but not a lot about anything in particular, which is fun, but at the same time, not always so rewarding. So Tim Palmer shared some statistics on wild scenic rivers, and so this may be a rehash, but this is public information. This is Coulter referred to reports that go to Congress. And so the Forest Service, we manage 125 wild and scenic rivers across the country. We spoke about the key provisions in the Wild and Scenic River Act that we're supposed to fulfill. Our field reports to us that 22% of our rivers are meeting those requirements by the Act. 43% of our rivers have a partner organization that helps support them. And so in a world where we in the agency look a lot to partners to help us get work done, when I compare it with the wilderness program, which I think is more in the 90-something percentile, 43% is pretty low. 70% of the rivers nationwide have a primary river manager that reports spending less than 25% of their time on river management. That statistic can be kind of misleading in that all rivers aren't created equal. And so quite frankly, I know of rivers that might not take more than 25% of an agency person's time. But then we have other rivers that probably require more, that we need to get folks out there more often working on those rivers. Regionally, 50% of our rivers are meeting the key provisions of the Act. 25%, and in a region where we claim four rivers, that's one, 25% have a partnership group associated with them. And no river manager in the region spends more than 50% of their time on river management. And so I just keep going back to that last statistic just to share that many of us in the agency wear multiple hats. Coulter hit it on the head earlier. She said, we have the internet now. We do things a little bit more efficiently. But obviously, when you compare those other statistics, there is some improvement to be had. Coulter, I was going to pass it to you for just a forest perspective at this point on just how we're doing.
Yeah, so I think I referenced this earlier. In my job, I probably spend about plus or minus 1/3 of my time working on Wild and Scenic River. The other amount of time is spread between the wilderness program, the trails program, and those other ones that I get to run around with a little bit too. I spend a lot of time working with our other partners. In my case, that's Glacier National Park, since that's one of the neighbors on the Three Forks of the Flathead. I spend a lot of time coordinating with Glacier National Park, both to work out mutual interest, but also to take advantage of each organization's strengths. So they have things that they can offer and do better than we can, and vice versa. So it's a time well spent, I think, working with them. But I do a lot of work with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks as well. A lot of coordination with them. So they have a role. Both agencies have a role to play, and it's worth spending time with them. We do have a stewardship group in our area. That's the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation. So they do some partnered work with us. What they're most commonly doing is trail access improvement and campsite inventories in the wilderness, in the wild sections of the river. They are specializing in that. That 1/3 of my time spent on rivers is probably going to go up here a little bit, and that is because the Three Forks of the Flathead is starting to work on updating our river management plan. So we're going to be working on developing a comprehensive river management plan. And some of the other duties that I do, I need to commit a lot of more time to that. And so some of my other work will probably slack here for a little bit, or I'll probably try to keep all the balls in the air at once, and we'll see how that goes. But just trying to share that perspective of what it really looks like on the ground. Oh, and I have one other thought. The South Fork of the Flathead, I don't manage that stretch. That's the neighboring ranger district, and so a lot of time coordinating with them. Hey, can we borrow this tool? Oh yeah, we can send somebody up to help with that. I got this question. What do you think of that, neighbor? Trying to make sure we're having a consistent approach on our river system for our users in our area. I think we're back to Jimmy again.
So yeah, we're going to go back and forth a couple times here. So we want to talk a little bit about the people who manage rivers within the agency. And we oftentimes highlight field staff, and we're going to do that. But I also wanted to give a kudos to our staff in the Washington office and just highlight something, an agency shift that happened right around 2004. We, within the Forest Service, the chief appointed a new position within the Washington office, and that was a director for wilderness and wild scenic rivers. And so it might not mean a whole lot to folks in the room, but for agency staff, it just signified, it raised the importance of these programs internally, but it also once again noted that interdisciplinary nature of what we do. Previously, wilderness and wild scenic rivers have been housed under recreation, was viewed mostly as a recreation program. And I think sometimes we felt like we struggled to bring in that interdisciplinary nature. And so with that, we've had a few key folks since then in that position. And I want to speak to that because I think it's important as those people move into that and then move on, they come with the perspective of the director for Wilderness and Wild and Scenic Rivers. And so our first ever director was Mary Wagner on the bottom right here. And she later moved on to be the Associate Chief of the Forest Service. The second director was Chris Brown on this bottom photo here. This is Chris and my wife and I paddling on the Potomac River right outside of Washington, D.C. He was previously an employee of American Rivers and then moved on to work for the National Park Service before becoming the director for the Forest Service Wilderness and Wild and Scenic Rivers program. Next up is Leanne Martin, who I think many of you know is our current regional forester. So she comes from that perspective of being the director for Wilderness and Wild and Scenic Rivers. And then currently in the left-hand corner there, Sue Spears, that shorter woman next to the sign on the left, she's our current director, has been in that position, I think, for maybe 3 or 4 years at this point. And then Steve Chesterton is standing next to her. And for me, within our agency, I think these two programs are very well grounded in the field. We have pretty close connection to those folks in the Washington office. A prime example are these two banners sitting here today. They ordered these a few weeks ago because there was a big event in Washington, D.C. called Hike the Hill, which I think some of you attended, and then very quickly put them in the mail and shipped them out here so we could use them in the region specifically for tonight. And so for me, it just is a testament to the commitment they have for the work we do. And I'm not looking for a raise or a promotion. I'm going to pass it to you.
Okay, some of the other people who manage rivers, I mentioned this earlier, but National Parks, Bureau of Reclamation, or excuse me, Bureau of Land Management and Fish and Wildlife Service and other state agencies. And in Montana, I referenced some of the examples, Fish, Wildlife and Parks, Glacier National Park, et cetera. These are some of the other river managers for the Forest Service in Region 1. And there's some pretty fun people here on this list. We have Jenny Blake up here, and I worked with Jenny Blake on the Payette. So it's fun how you interact with people and then kind of move away and then run back into each other years later. Deb Gale over here. Oh, excuse me, Jenny Blake, she's the district ranger at Moose Creek. And then Deb Gale in the center there, she works on the Bitterroot National Forest. Chris Ryan, is that Chris on the end here?
That's Chris behind Deb.
Oh, Chris, oh, there she is, she's so goofy. Chris Ryan was Jimmy's predecessor. Chris Noyes, he's the river manager for the Lochsa, Selway, Middle Fork. He's there on the end. And we have Brandon, I've not met Brandon, how do you say his last name? Napton? He works with the Lochsa River, standing here on the log. And we have Adam Washback with the Stevensville Ranger District. And on the end, Bill Goslin with the West Fork Ranger District on the Bitterroot National Forest. Okay.
We're on the home stretch here, and so you're welcome to stay here and
Okay.
put in a plug wherever we want. And so, hey, we just want to put in a couple of plugs at this point. One is highlighting a couple of different web resources that we spoke to. One is we have a very important partnership with the River Management Society. Great resource for you to go to, and I think John's going to come up next and speak a little bit about training endeavors that will include not just agency staff but others. Rivers.gov is on the bottom right here. I'd say go there. There's links to many other river resources there. Forest Service, we don't always brag on our websites, but we went to the Wild and Scenic Rivers website and were impressed by the updates that were there. So just wanted to share that link as a resource for you to go to learn about Forest Service, Wild and Scenic Rivers. And then 50th anniversary events. For those who are around for the Wilderness 50th 4 years ago, A similar site as this was put up through a partnership with the University of Montana. This is up now. It still has work to be done. It's an interactive thing. Anytime someone's hosting an event, they can go in and plug it in. I know in this region there are numerous things going on in the Flathead. We have stuff planned on the Locksaw as well. And then I think there's things here and there. I think our partners and NGOs are planning things. And so I wanted folks to be aware of this and just encourage you, if you have an event, to go in there and plug it in. And actually the one highlighted there is us here tonight, because this is on there. And then last, we wanted to end this with a quick video clip. I'm hoping the sound will work if I click on this. Do we think it will?
Yeah, let's try it.
All right.
I know where it goes. It's not working.
You stand out of the way. Great. So with that, obviously this is also the 50th anniversary of the National Trail System Act. We have hashtags. Find your way. Go for it. And I think, unless you have anything else, we're ready to pass it on over to John.
Thanks, Natalie. Welcome, everyone. I'm conscious of the time right now. It's 10 after, so I'm going to try and go really quick through my slides so that we can give the audience time to ask questions. And also, it was a great delivery. These two are like a well-oiled machine, and you'd think they rehearsed this, but they're like clockwork, whipping through. So I am the director of the River Training Center for the River Management Society. You've heard the River Management Society referenced a lot. The River Training Center is a brand new program that they've gotten started, and it's falling on my shoulders to get this developed. So a lot of what you hear tonight is going to be new. I'm going to first talk to you a little bit about what the River Management Society is, so you understand that organization, and then I'll talk to you about what we're trying to do with the River Training Center. Okay? Great. So quick history on River Management Society. The roots actually stem back to 1972 with the Interagency Whitewater Committee and river administering agencies forming that group. And then there was a merger which formed the River Management Society, and it was the American River Management Society and the River Federation, which formed the River Management Society. A little bit of alphabet soup there. So who remembers the River Management Society? You've heard it referenced a lot tonight. So it's people that work for federal, state, and local agencies, not unlike the folks here with the Forest Service, BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, the Park Service. It's also students like many of you. It can be citizens, folks that are in the audience. It can be river scientists, NGOs. We have national NGOs like American Rivers, American Whitewater. We also have smaller groups like the Clark Fork Coalition or statewide groups like Idaho Rivers United that are members of the group. Anybody can be a member. Our mission is to support professionals that study, protect, and manage rivers in North America. And I say North America because we also include Canada. And we do that, we achieve that mission through the following goals here. We want to have professional development for those folks that have careers in river management so that they can continue learning as they advance in their career. We also provide information and education. We want to share cutting-edge science and management techniques. And then we also, for those folks that are making decisions or developing policy, we want to provide them a voice so that they know, here's the science, here's the management that's being done out there. We want that brought into the decision-making and the policy. And then we want to build their capacity through collaboration, help them network, give them the ability to talk back and forth with each other and learn that information that's available. We are divided into 8 chapters, with a chapter included for Canada. Each chapter has its own president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, and then they report up to the national board for the River Management Society. And each chapter has their own events. And if you become a member of the River Management Society, you can participate in chapter events virtually for free. They do river floats, they do trainings, cleanups, different things like that. So now I'm just going to talk about what we're trying to launch with the River Training Center. And I'm first going to talk about some of the materials that we already have developed. Jimmy mentioned that trying to find a presentation about wild and scenic rivers or something like that, it's hard to get something that fits for every audience. When you look at wilderness.net and you see some of the materials that are out there, I think I learned today from Andrea that the Carhart Center is going to be celebrating their 25th anniversary. So they have a little bit of a leg up on us of doing these type of trainings and developing this type of information. But we have a long laundry list of materials that are already available. We just haven't formalized and put them under one tent and said, this is the River Training Center. And that's what we hope to accomplish in the next year. So one of the things that was mentioned tonight are wild and scenic workshops. And there was a slide that Coulter put up about doing comprehensive river management plans. And the act was changed in 1986 for the Wild and Scenic River Act, which requires administering agencies that oversee a wild and scenic river to develop comprehensive river management plans. Well, that's not an easy feat. It's a fairly complex task. It requires lots of different skill sets, and not every forest or BLM region or whatever has the staff that is knowledgeable about that. So we put together regional trainings that help those people learn more about how to do it, and then the tools to start doing it. There was one in Whitefish last year that was well attended. Folks from a number of different agencies, Park Service, BLM, Forest Service, and I think maybe some Fish, Wildlife, and Parks folks from the state attended.
We had some students from U of M attend too.
Oh, that's right. So we did that training, put it on. We're doing another one in April out on the Mount Baker Snoqualmie Forest. We did one last fall down in San Bernardino, and it's to help people learn how to develop those comprehensive river management plans. But in addition to that, you also saw a lot of the things that were in the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act that are different components of the act that you have to do, whether it's an eligibility study, suitability study, determine that designation, or Jimmy showed the slide about a Section 7 determination to make sure you don't impact those wild and scenic values that it was designated for. That's all stuff that requires a certain skill set and knowledge about how that act was written and then how you implement it as a manager on the ground. So we help develop those trainings. Another thing we do is the River Ranger Rendezvous. Every year, a different chapter within the RMS organization hosts that. It's usually a 2 to 3 day event where folks that work in river management come in and do this rendezvous, and you can get exposed to a whole bunch of different trainings while you're at it. We also have a number of folks that are more senior in the river profession that are starting to get towards the sunset of their career, and we call those the subject matter experts. And there are trainers that go and put on these workshops. We're trying to develop what's called a Train the Trainer program, where we get new people that come in and start to learn different materials, or they may bring a subject matter that they're an expert on and develop trainings that are related to that. So that's an exciting area that we're trying to develop. We currently have a lot of webinars that are out there that are accessible to folks. I know we have some on Section 7, determinations, those types of things that are available to take. I just put one on for the BLM. It was actually an interagency one in Alaska, where they have a lot of wild and scenic river designations, but don't have management plans for all of them at this point in time. And we worked with about 25 different staff doing a webinar to help them get up to speed of what they need to be doing for management. We have a number of online trainings that are available for folks. The BLM just completed 12 modules on wild and scenic river management, and we helped develop some of those trainings for them with that, and those are going to be going live shortly. And then RMS also hosts a river library that has a whole suite of publications that range from very technical science to things that are more on the management end for dealing with that. So that was a very quick summary of those things so we can stay on time here. And then one of the other marquee events that the River Management Society is known for, every year we put on an event that brings people together, that some people would call it a conference, others call it a symposium. On every even year, we do a symposium. This year, it's going to be a 4-day event, and every odd year, we do an interagency workshop, which is a little bit smaller and a little bit shorter. But this year, because it is the 50th anniversary of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, we're celebrating Wild, Scenic, and Beyond. It's going to be in Vancouver, Washington, October 2nd through October 25th. And we're actually still accepting papers and poster presentations for that through this Friday. So if you have an idea, come find me later. It's very easy to get onto that site for River Management Society. And also, by the way, I didn't mention it, I have our quarterly journal up here in the front. Anybody that wants to grab one can do that. And then something else that Natalie mentioned at the beginning, RMS has started the River Studies and Leadership Certificate Program. It's for undergraduate students that want to get exposed to river management and the river profession, and it allows you to network with administrating agencies that work on rivers, or start your career path in that, and you get a certificate out of it. And I look at this as starting to train and educate that next generation of river managers that are going to be out there. We currently have 8 schools that are enrolled in the program: Colorado Mesa University, Prescott College, Virginia Commonwealth University, Sierra Nevada College, Western Washington, University of Utah, and then Minnesota State at Mankato. And then the most recent to join just in the last month is Northern Arizona University. And I think that as a graduate of University of Montana, and knowing the programs here, University of Montana is a really good candidate for it. With the forestry school here, our strong wildlife biology program, I think students would really benefit from being part of this program. The coursework to get a certificate from the River Studies and Leadership is you have to take 4 core courses that cover those topic areas: GIS, river science, river policy, and swiftwater rescue. And then you work with your advisor at your university and you identify emphasis areas. You take 2 more courses in that. So if you wanted to be a fisheries biologist, you might take 2 fisheries related classes, or river and lake ecology or something like that. You might be more in the policy and management area, so you take 2 emphasis courses there, or more in the recreation, education, and tourism. And then you close that out by doing an internship or work with an agency or an industry person that's doing that, and get your certificate. And that also helps you, we're right now working with the agencies to recognize students that have gotten a River Studies and Leadership Certificate, to help them in the hiring process if they want to get a job working for one of the agencies. Another area that we're working on is called the National Rivers Project. This becomes basically a warehouse for information about rivers. Currently, there is no place you can go and search any place you want in the country to find geospatial information about rivers from a recreation perspective, or water trails, or wild and scenic rivers. So we've been pulling this together through partnerships with NGOs, state agencies, folks that have this information on a more local or regional landscape. And so just to show you what this looks like, I did a quick search on an area that I know just remotely, but didn't know if it was going to be in the database. I thought, let me check northern Vermont. Let's say I was going to do a vacation there and I wanted to go and do something that was river related. So I pulled up this area of northern Vermont, and you can see the legend on the right. I could click any one of those filters there and narrow my search or expand it. So this is the Missisquoi River in northern Vermont. And it shows that there's a water trail there. There's also a wild and scenic river. It shows me access points. And if we were live right now with this, I could click on any one of those points. It would tell me what kind of facilities are at those access points. So this is a growing database. I'll show you the next one a little closer to home. So I took the Flathead River system there, and I couldn't squeeze it all into one screenshot. So that's the North Fork. It shows the access points on it, and then it shows the Middle Fork right there.
It looks right, too.
And so we're expanding that right now. We're currently actually just signed an MOU with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, because they have the geospatial data for a lot of the rivers in Montana. It's already done, so rather than enter it in from scratch, we sign a memorandum of understanding with them. They get updates from us, and we get updates from them. And we've been doing that all over. So this is something that RMS has taken on. Another thing that we have, it's a resource, is a summary of FERC hydropower licenses. And for anybody that's ever worked on a FERC hydropower license, it's a very long process. It takes a minimum of 5.5 years, and the documents that come out of it, you know, you can stack on top of this table. They're thousands of pages long. But what they do is they write a prescription for the conditions that should be in that river, and they change daily, seasonally, and annually what has to be happening there. So a river manager can look at the existing condition in the river and use our hydropower summary as a quick reference tool to say, do they have the right minimum stream flow right now? Or shouldn't they be doing this release for fisheries that are migrating into the area? So it's a quick reference for them. It also allows folks that are entering into their first relicensing to look at what practices have been done other places and what processes were used so that they don't have to start from scratch. So a quick plug for RMS. There's different levels of membership, from a professional like myself to all the way down to a student level, and then in between for organizations and nonprofits. Very easy to become a member, and it helps support the work that we do. And then a quick plug for some of the events that are happening in Wild and Scenic River Celebration in our region. So the lecture series you're in right now, I have on the top, and then I know that on April 3rd, you guys are wrapping up with a condensed version of the Wild and Scenic films from from American Rivers with Cassie, and then she's having a larger event on the 26th at the Roxy. And then we mentioned the Locksaw. There's going to be an event there on Saturday, May 26th, which is the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend. We'll have informational stuff down by Fish Creek at the put-in, the normal put-in for folks in the lower. And at Locksaw Falls, we'll have some information. And then we're going to have a family event at the Pavilion at Wilderness Gateway that afternoon, 3 to 5. And then the RMS Symposium. And then I also put a really long URL which goes to the reference to event map, what's happening nationally. So if you're traveling and looking for Wild and Scenic River events, you can actually go to that website, which was, what's the beginning entry of it? Is it rivers.gov?
If you go to rivers.gov, you can
Yeah,
click on.
you'll get to that. It'll show it on the side. But actually, that's being housed right on here on the University of Montana campus. You can see in the URL. So that's all being populated right here by Lisa Ronald. I think that's it for me. So.
All right, we have a few minutes for questions to any of our speakers.
We wore you down.
Is the River Studies and Leadership Certificate Program strictly for undergrads, or is that something that could potentially be like a grad level certificate?
It could be with the school you're working with. It's not restricted to undergrads.
Well, I have a question for the audience. Can one or two people share that a wild and scenic river, when you were looking at the map, that you did not know was a wild and scenic river until you looked at the map? Yeah?
The Taunton River, I grew up fishing the Taunton River in Massachusetts, and I just found out.
Okay. Any others out there? Yeah.
I also grew up along the Cache la Poudre in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I didn't know that was Walden.
Okay.
I also have a question for you guys. You were talking about the Forest Service planning process and how that can, I don't know if I just misunderstood, but you mentioned that that might change what is designated as wild and scenic. Is that possible?
You start.
So it won't change a designated river, but we're required to go through a study process each iteration of a forest plan. And so during that, we may find rivers that we consider to be eligible that we hadn't in the past. And I don't think it's unheard of for us to say, well, we found this river to be eligible in the past, but maybe it's not now. I'm looking at Mike to correct me.
Or vice versa.
Yeah, or certainly vice versa. We may find more rivers that we would say were eligible, but not a designated river. We don't evaluate those. Congress has said these are designated rivers.
So is that a fairly common way for study rivers to get on the radar for wild and scenic as they go through their review process and changing their forest plan?
Well, it doesn't require that, and so it's a tough one. I think our entire process would be, we would find a river to be eligible, and then the next step for us is we would decide whether or not it was suitable. And that's essentially our kind of statement as an agency that, boy, here's a river we think is worthy of designation. Past that, we rely on NGOs and Congress to decide, and the public, whether or not that's going to be designated. Does that make sense? Good question, and tough one.
Jimmy, maybe, or Holger, maybe you could mention, like, if folks are interested in getting involved in this dialogue, what are some of the upcoming or ongoing forest planning processes that are regional that folks could kind of like weigh in with regards to wild and scenic rivers?
Certainly. We have multiple forests that are in a variety of stages of forest plan revision. The Flathead Forest, which we spoke to, is nearing the finish line. But the Nez Perce Clearwater on the Idaho side, the Helena Lewis and Clark, and the Custer Gallatin are all in the midst of their forest plan revision. As a part of that, they're going through this wild and scenic river study process. I'd encourage you, they're developing some great story maps on what that process looks like. Probably provides a better picture than we are articulating here of kind of where they're at and what's going on. And then certainly outside of this region, there are many other forests that are doing that as well. So it's a good one, yeah.
I saw a hand back there.
Same question, but for you on the Flathead, is there any events going on up there? I heard about a barbecue with the rat companies.
Oh, okay. So for celebrating the Three Forks of the 50th anniversary, generally our plan is to participate and represent the Flathead National Forest at ongoing community events. So one of the outfitters in our area, Glacier Guides Montana Raft, they do an annual rafting for refuse. We do participate most years, but we're going all in with the 50th anniversary this year, and they wanted to make it 50th anniversary themed. So a lot of emphasis on participating, and anybody can sign up, and Glacier Guides Montana Raft will facilitate people floating on the river, picking up trash, etc. And then we'll have a barbecue afterwards and celebrate and learn more about the Wild and Scenic River system there. We're also going to be at the fair, the parades, things like that. So we'll just use that as our theme for all of our participatory stuff this year.
So I know it's approaching 8:30 and we don't want to keep people too late. So we're happy to, I'm happy to stay here and answer questions. I'm not going to speak for these two, but if folks want to continue on with dialogue, that's great. We can stick around, but we're good to wrap up if you are, Natalie.
Yeah.
And I'd like people to grab journals because I don't have to take them back to the Flathead. So those are free, grab them. There's a lot of information. There's an article by Tim Palmer in there about Wild and Scenic Rivers. You might learn something from that.
Thank you so much.